Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh. We're here on Yahweh's Sabbath day, one day after Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. Today's message, I wanted to cover some of the interesting scriptures covering Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and got quite a bit of information to cover. Greetings to those on the internet or those that might be watching live. We hope you enjoy the messages that go out. In the Talmud, the Day of Atonement is called the Great Fast, and it's traditionally called the Great Fast. But I want to touch a little bit on how Yahweh wants us to approach this day, and also a little bit on how it ties in with some of the messianic scriptures. The tabernacle is a pattern of heavenly realities. Yahweh uses a lot of things in the creation and in nature that are allegories of greater things. And I love diving into some of these things. Namely, we have seeds and soil and water and light and planting and sowing and reaping and pruning and fruit, sands and stars, and all these things have a significance to us as human beings. The seed is the word, the soil is the heart where the word goes. The water could be the spirit or the word. Light could be knowledge or truth, which there's light has many layers, and then planting and sowing of the word, reaping the benefits, the fruit that comes from it, and we are all his harvest, and all these things are allegories of how he's dealing with us, and even the harvests behind the feast. And I believe that there's a deep significance with that, which I won't get into today. But let's start off. First, I want to mention that the word fast is not found in the Torah. The word fast is not there. There are a few references of people fasting, but the word fast, which is 6684 in the Hebrew, it's tzom, pronounced T-S-O-M. But the word fast is rarely associated with Yom Kippur. But we will look at a few references there. The word for what we are supposed to do on Yom Kippur is to afflict. The Hebrew word afflict is 6031 anah. And it is to oppress, to humble, to bow down. We'll look at a few references there. Let's start off in Leviticus chapter 16. We'll dip into a few scriptures in the Torah concerning the day. Chapter 16 of Leviticus, starting in verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they offered before Yahweh and died. And Yahweh said unto Moses, Speak unto Aaron thy brother, that he come not at all times into the holy place within the veil before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not. For I will appear in the cloud upon the mercy seat. I'm going to go through this chapter and just pull out a few bits of information, and then we'll cross-reference it somewhere else and see these things come to light. I'm going to skip down to verse 15. If anybody wants to go back and actually read, I'm going to pick back up in 12, but if you want to read the whole service, it's in chapter 16. In verse 12, and he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar before Yahweh, and his hands full of sweet incense, beaten small, and bring it within the veil. The reason I actually pulled this verse out is this imagery is seen in the book of Revelations, if anybody wants to go back and cross-reference that. Verse 15, Then shall he kill the goat of the sin offering that is for the people, and bring his blood within the veil, and do with that blood as he did with the blood of the bullock, and sprinkle it upon the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. And he shall make an atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel, and because of their transgressions and all their sins. And so shall he do for the tabernacle of the congregation that remaineth among them in the midst of their uncleanness. Skip down to verse 29. And this shall be a statute forever unto you, that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict. There's the word 60:31. You shall afflict your souls, and do no work at all, whether it be one of your own country or a stranger that sojourns among you. It's interesting that all of you and anybody visiting or a stranger among you is supposed to do this. For on that day shall the priest make an atonement for you to cleanse you, that you may be clean from all your sins before Yahweh. It shall be a Sabbath of rest unto you. You shall afflict your souls by a statute forever. And the priest whom he shall anoint, and whom he shall consecrate to minister in the priest's office in his father's stead, shall make an atonement, and shall put on the linen clothes, even the holy garments. He shall make an atonement for the holy sanctuary. He shall make an atonement for the tabernacle of the congregation, and for the altar. And he shall make an atonement for the priests, for all the people of the congregation. And this shall be an everlasting statute unto you, to make an atonement for the children of Israel for all their sins once a year. And he did as Yahweh commanded Moses. Now let's skip over to the book of Hebrews and see how some of this kind of ties in. And Hebrews is very rich with details about the temple and the sacrifices and things like that. I'm just going to read the first 2 verses of Hebrews chapter 8. Now of the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such an high priest, who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which Yahweh pitched, and not man. So here we see that our high priest is a minister of the true tabernacle, which Yahweh pitched, and not man. Let me flip back to Hebrews chapter 6, starting in verse 19. Which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that within the veil, whether the forerunner, that's a person that goes before, is for us entered, even Yeshua, made an high priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. So here, our high priest is the one who went into the veil before us. Chapter 9 of Hebrews. And verse 22. And almost all things are by the law purged with blood, and without the shedding of blood is no remission. It is therefore necessary that the patterns of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For the Messiah is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figure of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of Elohim for us. Nor yet that he should offer himself often, as the high priest entered into the holy place every year with the blood of others, for then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now, once in the end of the world, hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment, so Messiah was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. Chapter 10 and verse 19. Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Yeshua, by a new and living way, which he hath consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh, and having an high priest over the house of Elohim, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. So even the veil into the holiest was a symbol of his flesh. That is how we enter in to the holy place, and that's through the broken body of Yeshua. Let's go back to Leviticus chapter 23. Starting in verse 26. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Also on the 10th day of this 7th month there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be holy, be an holy convocation unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. And you shall do no work in that same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make an atonement for you before Yahweh or Elohim. Over the next few verses, we'll see two things repeated over and over. One, afflict the soul, and two, no work whatsoever. Repeated, matter of fact, 4 times in the next few verses. Whatsoever soul it be that shall not be afflicted, in that same day he shall be cut off from among his people. And whatsoever soul it be that doeth any work in that same day, that same soul will I destroy from among his people. You shall do no manner of work. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, in all your dwellings. It shall be a Sabbath. It shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict your souls in the 9th day of the month, and even from even unto even shall you celebrate your Sabbath. Let's look, well, I won't go there, but Numbers 29:7 says the same thing. On this day you shall afflict your soul, and you shall do no manner of work. Now, this word, afflict, what does afflict mean? Now, fasting is definitely a form of affliction. It is denying the self, denying the flesh what it wants. But let's look at a few places where this word afflict is used. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Starting in verse 10. Deuteronomy 8 and 10. When thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless Yahweh thy Elohim for the good land which he hath given thee. Beware that thou forget not Yahweh thy Elohim, in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day. Lest, when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget Yahweh thy Elohim, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage, who led thee through that terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents, and scorpions, and drought, where there was no water? Who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint? Who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee to do thee good at thy latter end? Right here, this word is used right after he said that Yahweh brought them through with no water, brought them through a terrible wilderness where there were serpents and scorpions, drought, through the wilderness, and fed them manna, that he might humble them, bring them low under his authority. And thou say in thy heart, mine power and mine might of mine hand hath gotten me this wealth. So he's giving them a warning here not to get high-minded and forget about Yahweh, and he reminds them that he brought them through these trials to afflict them, to humble them. And we'll find out that sometimes affliction is good. Well, yeah, always.
It don't feel good.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Sometimes it doesn't always feel good. I want to backtrack that to Genesis 15:13 is the first place we see that word anah. I skipped over that. Genesis chapter 15. Verse 12, and when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. That word, they shall afflict. The Israelites were being afflicted under the authority of Egypt. They were under their submission. And also Genesis 16 and verse 6. Genesis 16:6. And Abram said unto Sarai, behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarah dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So the maid was under Sarah's authority here, and she dealt hardly with her. She afflicted her. So this is used kind of in a negative sense here. Exodus chapter 10. Exodus 10 verse 1. And Yahweh said unto Moses, go in unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart, and the heart of his servants, that I might show these my signs before him, and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son and of thy son's son what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know how that I am Yahweh. And Moses and Aaron came in unto Pharaoh and said unto him, thus saith Yahweh Elohim of the Hebrews, how long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself? That word humble there is the same Hebrew word for afflict. How long is it going to be before you humble yourself and come under the authority of Yahweh? I paraphrase all that. How long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me? Let my people go that they may serve me. Else, if thou refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow will I bring the locusts into thy coast. He's going to bring something upon them to afflict, to humble. Psalms 119. Actually, I'm going to go to Psalms 35 first. This is one of the few instances where affliction and fasting are connected in the same verse. Psalms 35, starting in verse 11. False witnesses did rise up. They laid to my charge things that I knew not. They rewarded me evil for good, to the spoiling of my soul. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer returned into mine own bosom. So here there's a reference of someone, or David, humbling his soul with fasting. Now, let's go to Isaiah 58. This is an interesting chapter here. What made me dig into this chapter at one point in time, I was talking to somebody on the Sabbath, and they told me, well, we don't need to talk about this because this is the Sabbath. And I was like, well, what do you mean? It was like, well, you're only supposed to talk about biblical things on the Sabbath. You can't divert your mind or talk about anything else on the Sabbath. And they got it from this chapter where it says not doing your own pleasure or speaking your own words. And it's believed by many that this chapter is referring to the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, because of some of the wording going on in the chapter. We'll start off in verse 1. Isaiah 58, verse 1. Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. So here we have the blowing of the trumpet and the showing of sins. Yet they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinances of their Elohim. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching to Elohim. Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and thou takest no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast you find pleasure, and exact all your labors. This exact all your labors means put someone else under submission to do work. Behold, you fast for strife and debate, and you smite with the fist of wickedness. You shall not fast as you do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high. So here we have a group of people fasting for the wrong reasons. The motive is not right. They're fasting for debate and strife. And on the day of their fast, they're still doing their own pleasure, and they've still got servants under them doing the labors. But then in verse 5, Yahweh is going to tell him what he's calling for. And I think that applies to Yom Kippur. Is it such a fast that I have chosen, a day for a man to afflict his soul? Is it to bow down his head as a bulrush, and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Wilt thou call this a fast and an acceptable day to Yahweh? So here he's asking the question, do you think this is what I want? Bowing down and spreading ashes and sackcloth, do you think this is acceptable? Verse 6. Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke. That's a yoke of bondage. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house when thou seest the naked? This is interesting here. He's asking about their mentality on the fast, and then he says, this is the fast that I have chosen, and he actually says, deal your bread to the hungry. Pass out food to somebody that needs it on the fast day. And these examples that he is giving, when we fast and we abstain from food, we're denying self. But the greatest act of denying self is going out and helping somebody else. Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh. I think that means hide yourself from your own people. Your own people that need help, don't hide yourself from them. And that doesn't necessarily mean the guy down there on the bypass, begging for change is your people that needs help. You got to use wisdom and discretion. Be a wise steward. If he's hungry, give him something to eat. Hallelujah. And then he'll go buy something else. Anyway, sorry. Then shall thy light break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee. The glory of Yahweh shall be thy reward. You fast for these reasons, but when you fulfill it the way I want you to fulfill it, then your light shall break forth as the morning, and thine health shall spring forth speedily, and thy righteousness shall go before thee. The glory of Yahweh shall be thy reward. Then shalt thou call, and Yahweh shall answer. Thou shalt cry, and he shall say, Here I am. And that's interesting. They started out, why we fasted and you're not paying no attention to us? Why have we fasted? You take no knowledge of us. You're not paying attention to us. And he said, if you do it this way, you will call and I will hear. You will cry and I'll say, Here I am. If you take away from the midst of thee the yoke, the putting forth of the finger and speaking vanity, and if thou draw out thy soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then shall thy light rise in obscurity and thy darkness be as the noonday. And Yahweh shall guide thee continually and satisfy thy soul in drought and make fat thy bones. And thou shalt be like a watered garden and like a spring of water whose waters fail not. And they that shall be of thee shall build the old waste places, and thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations. And thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in. And what this last verse that we just read here, it seems like by doing this, you're bringing the people that follow in your steps, that come up behind you, you will be making things the way they're supposed to be. You'll be bringing people back into line with my intentions in Torah. The repair of the breach, the break, a restorer of the path to dwell in. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of Yahweh honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words. That's where the gentleman got that from. Then shalt thou delight thyself in Yahweh, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of Yahweh hath spoken it. Now there is a mentality that we should have during this time, and if Yahweh blesses us with another Yom Kippur, I hope that we would be meditated in our hearts, not only to deny ourselves, deny our flesh, but also to reach out to others. And I think I'm going to try something different next year and plan ahead to try to fulfill some of the things that he's talking about here. And I also believe that this day that was celebrated yesterday is also prophetic of a future time when Yahweh removes sin from the earth. And after that happens, we can depart from our earthly tabernacles and enter into our heavenly tabernacles. Hallelujah.
Can't even get up there.